From forgotten folklore to hidden histories, some records demand to be found.
3 things you should never take in Taiwan. Some people imagine ghost stories begin in abandoned temples, forgotten graveyards, or deep mountain forests. In Taiwan, many of them begin somewhere far more ordinary, behind the door of a rented room, on the walk home from school, at a bus stop on a rainy night. Some apartments in Taipei are cheaper than they should be. Usually, there is a reason. Years ago, a young man had just started working in the city and was looking for a place of his own. Like many young people in Taipei, he did not have much money. Most private one-bedroom apartments were already beyond what he could afford. Then he found one that seemed almost too cheap. The apartment was a small one-bedroom unit in an older building. The corridor outside was lit by fluorescent tubes. The paint around the doors had faded, and some of the floor tiles were cracked. The landlord explained the reason for the low rent before handing over the keys. A year earlier, a woman had died inside the room. He did not offer many details. He only said that after the incident, he had hired a Taoist priest to perform a cleansing ritual. The room's history was no secret. The low rent reflected that. The young man stood in the doorway and looked around. There was a small bedroom with a bed, a small desk, an old television, and a small bathroom. Nothing looked unusual. In the end, the price made the decision for him. He signed the lease. Even so, he was not completely comfortable. Before moving in, he visited a temple he regularly attended and asked for protection. The temple gave him 3 talismans. One was placed beside the door. One was placed near the foot of the bed. The third he carried with him every day. Then he moved in. To his surprise, nothing happened. The weeks passed quietly. The apartment became home. He settled into a routine of work, dinner, television, and sleep. The talismans gradually faded into the background of everyday life, and before long he barely thought about why the rent had been so cheap in the first place. In fact, the year went rather well. His job was stable. Life was comfortable. He met a woman and began dating her. As the relationship became more serious, they eventually decided to rent a new place together. So he began moving out. Little by little, the apartment emptied. Boxes disappeared. Furniture was carried downstairs. Clothes were packed into bags. A few days before returning the keys, he decided to spend one final night in the apartment. Earlier that day, he had spent hours moving the last of his belongings into the new place he would share with his girlfriend. By evening, the apartment was almost empty. Only a few bags remained. The old television still sat against the wall, exactly where it had been when he first rented the room. The 2 talismans had already been taken down and packed away. Pale rectangular marks remained where they had hung for nearly a year. He was exhausted. The weather was hot, and after spending the day carrying boxes up and down stairs, his clothes were soaked with sweat. Still, he wasn't quite ready to say goodbye to the apartment. Despite its history, it had been his first home in Taipei. So before returning for the night, he went out and bought himself a late-night meal. When he came back, the room felt strangely different. Not frightening, just unfamiliar. Perhaps it was because it was nearly empty. Perhaps it was because he knew he would never live there again. He set the food down on the desk and decided to shower before eating. As he gathered his clothes, he suddenly felt as though someone was watching him. The sensation appeared without warning. He turned immediately. The room was empty. The door was closed. Nothing was there. For a moment he stood still, listening. Then the feeling faded. He told himself he was imagining things. After all, he had lived there for nearly a year. Nothing had ever happened, so he stepped into the bathroom. The light was still on when he pulled the shower curtain closed. A few minutes later, he finished showering and stepped back into the room. The light was off. He stopped. Before entering the bathroom, he was certain he had left it on. Now the fluorescent tube overhead was dark. Only a faint glow from outside filtered through the window. For several seconds, he simply stood there, staring into the darkness. Then he felt it again. The same sensation as before. Someone was in the room, not speaking, not moving, just watching. He reached for the switch and turned the light back on. Nothing was there. The room looked exactly as it always had. Trying to ignore the feeling, he sat down and ate. Yet even while eating, he could not shake the sense that someone was watching him from somewhere inside the apartment. Eventually, he finished his meal and gathered the trash. The moment he opened the door and stepped into the corridor, he froze. A wave of cold air hit him. Not cool air, cold air. The kind of cold that seemed to settle into his skin. That frightened him more than anything else. It was the middle of summer. Only an hour earlier, he had been sweating enough to need a shower. The corridor should have been hot. Instead, it felt unnaturally cold. He threw away the trash as quickly as he could and returned to the apartment. By then, he was deeply unsettled. Still, he tried to convince himself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Eventually, he turned off the light and went to bed. He did not know how long he lay there awake. At some point, he became aware that something felt wrong. His chest felt heavy, as though something were pressing down on him. He reached for the bedside lamp. Nothing happened. He tried again. The lamp would not turn on. Now fully awake, he forced himself to sit up. The room remained dark, illuminated only by the faint light coming through the window. That was when he saw it. At the foot of the bed sat a dense shadow. It had no face, no features, only a vaguely human outline. It seemed darker than the darkness around it, as though a piece of shadow had gathered itself into a single shape. It did not move. It did not speak. It simply sat there watching him. For a moment he could not react. Then panic took over. He jumped out of bed, rushed into the main room, and slammed his hand against the light switch. The light came on. The shadow was gone. The room was empty. He did not stay to investigate. He grabbed his phone and called his girlfriend. Then he left the apartment. That night, he stayed at her place. When he arrived, his girlfriend immediately knew something was wrong. She asked what had happened. The story came out in pieces. The feeling of being watched. The light turning off by itself. The unnatural cold in the corridor. The shadow sitting at the foot of the bed. By the time he finished, neither of them knew what to make of it. Then she asked a simple question. Weren't there talismans in that room? The question caught him off guard. Then he remembered. Earlier that day, while packing the last of his things for the move, he had removed the 2 talismans from the apartment, the one beside the door, the one near the foot of the bed. For nearly a year, they had remained exactly where he had placed them. Nothing strange had happened. He had taken them down almost casually, assuming they were no longer needed. The next morning, he contacted the landlord. The landlord was surprised. As far as he knew, the apartment had already been cleansed a year earlier. The Taoist priest he had hired had assured him that everything that could be done had been done. Still, after hearing what had happened, he decided to contact the same priest. Later that day, the 3 of them met at the apartment. Despite his reluctance, the tenant agreed to accompany them back to the room. The apartment looked exactly as it had before. Empty, quiet, ordinary. The priest spent a long time looking around before speaking. Finally, he nodded. The room still felt unusually heavy, he said. That was not impossible. Someone had died there. Places like that sometimes carried a different atmosphere for years. The landlord reminded him that a cleansing had already been performed. The priest nodded. Then he offered several possibilities. The room might simply have carried heavier yin energy than most places. Something wandering nearby might have been drawn to it. Or perhaps what the tenant experienced had nothing to do with the woman who had died there at all. He could not say. He offered no definite explanation. Neither did anyone else. The old television was still there. And on the walls, the pale marks where the talismans had once hung remained. No one ever learned exactly what happened that night. A month later, the apartment was advertised again. The second story is about a red envelope. When Joe was a child in Taiwan, His walk home from school took him past the same road junction every afternoon. One afternoon, he saw a red envelope lying on the ground. It was bright and new. The wind pushed it along the edge of the road, making it move slightly against the pavement. A child does not see a red envelope and think of ghosts. A child only sees something bright left on the road. Joe picked it up and opened it. Inside were some bills, a folded piece of paper, and a small lock of hair tied with red thread. But the child only noticed the bills. He used them to buy snacks, then went home. That night, Joe developed a high fever. His family thought he was sick. In the middle of the night, they went into his room and found him sitting up in bed, face flushed, talking to the corner. When they asked who he was speaking to, he said there was an older girl there. She wanted to play with him. After the fever passed, the family slowly let the matter go. Children say strange things when they are sick. More than 10 years passed. The boy who had picked up the envelope had become a grown man. Around that time, he started waking up exhausted every morning. His back ached. His waist hurt. It felt as if something had been pressing down on him during the night. At first, he blamed the office chair. Then the dreams began repeating. In the dream, there was a long corridor. At the far end stood a woman with long hair, wearing a dress, her head lowered. The floor under her looked wet, though nothing dripped from the ceiling. Every night she came a little closer. Joe wanted to move, but could not. He wanted to shout, but no sound came out. His chest felt so heavy, it was as if someone were sitting on it. The first night, he only saw the end of the corridor. The second night, he saw the hem of her dress. After that, he saw the hair hanging against her face. He saw her hands at her sides, the fingertips pale. Each night she came closer down the corridor, until one night there was no corridor at all. Joe found himself lying in his own bedroom. She was standing beside the bed. She slowly raised her head. Her face was not rotten. It was not monstrous. It was young and quiet, as if she had been waiting for a very long time. She looked at Joe and said in Taiwanese Hokkien, "You said you would marry me." Joe woke up, soaked in sweat. The sky was not yet bright. There was no one in the room, but beside his pillow lay one long strand of hair. The dream stirred an old memory. Suddenly, he remembered the envelope he had picked up on the roadside years earlier. He told his family what had happened. When his mother heard the words red envelope, her face changed. The older relatives began asking about the envelope from years ago. Was there only money inside? Or was there also paper? Was there hair? Only then did Joe remember. In some parts of Taiwan, there are stories about ghost marriages. When an unmarried girl dies, her family may not want her to remain a wandering spirit. They place her name, birth details, a lock of hair, and money into a red envelope, then leave it by the roadside. Whoever picks it up has accepted the marriage. Joe had been a child. He did not understand. He had only taken the money and bought a few snacks. But to the girl, he had accepted it. The cash was gone. The snacks had been eaten. In the logic of that envelope, the answer had already been given. So she waited. She waited for a child to grow into a man old enough to marry. Then she came back into his dreams. Not all at once. Not in one night. Every night, she walked a little closer, until he could finally hear what she had been saying. His family later brought him to have the matter handled. Offerings were made. Paper was burned. Someone was asked to help reconcile the obligation. The family never learned exactly who the girl had been. The envelope was long gone, and whatever details had once been inside it had disappeared years earlier. After that, Joe never picked up anything from the ground again. Sometimes, when he passed a road junction and saw a red plastic bag or a piece of red paper moving in the wind, his steps would slow. The frightening thing was not what had been inside the envelope. It was that some things, once picked up, cannot be put down, even after more than 10 years. The third story begins on a mountain road in the rain. Like many university students in Taiwan, a group of friends spent much of their free time riding scooters. Their campus sat near several mountain roads popular with local riders. During the day, people went there for the scenery. At night, students went there because the roads were quiet. They knew the curves. They knew the shortcuts. And after riding the same routes for years, they stopped thinking about danger. One night, during a heavy rainstorm, a group of friends took the mountain road as they had many times before. There was one particular curve everyone knew. The turn was steep, visibility was poor, and the road became slippery whenever it rained. That night, one scooter entered the curve too quickly. The rider tried to brake, the tires lost grip, the scooter slid. By the time it stopped, it was too late. A young woman riding on the back was killed in the accident. The surviving friends never forgot the place. For months afterwards, some of them refused to ride scooters at all. Instead, they began taking the bus that passed the same mountain road. Nearly half a year later, during another night of heavy rain, several of those friends were riding home together on one of those buses. The rain hammered against the windows. Most of the passengers sat quietly. As the bus approached the stop nearest the accident site, it slowed and pulled over. The doors opened. Nobody was waiting outside. At least, nobody that they could see. After several seconds, the doors closed again. The bus pulled away. Then one of the students noticed something strange. Water was appearing on the floor, not dripping from the ceiling, not leaking through a window. Footprints. Wet footprints. They began near the front entrance and continued down the aisle, one after another, as though someone had stepped onto the bus and was walking toward the back. The students stared. There was nobody there. Yet the footprints continued, several rows closer, then several more, until they seemed to stop near where the students were sitting. No one spoke. No one moved. When the bus finally reached their stop, they got off as quickly as they could. The next day, they told their friends what had happened. At first, nobody knew what to make of it. Then someone suggested asking a classmate who was known for seeing things other people could not. A few days later, the group boarded the same route again. This time, the classmate came with them. The weather was clear. Nothing unusual happened for most of the journey. Then the bus approached the same stop. The doors opened. The classmate immediately looked outside. A few moments later, he turned pale. One of the students showed him a photograph of the young woman who had died in the accident. "Is that who you saw?" they asked. He nodded. "Yes." Then after a pause, he added, "She is standing there waving at you." He kept staring out the window and said, "But her arms and legs are broken." No one spoke after that. In the months that followed, the group began leaving offerings near the bus stop. Fruit, incense, paper money. Nothing elaborate, just enough to show respect. After a while, the strange incident stopped. Whether the young woman had truly been there, nobody could prove. But the students never forgot the footprints, because on that rainy night, the bus doors had opened. Nobody got on. And yet something had walked all the way down the aisle. Taiwan has many lights at night: convenience store lights, scooter headlights, white corridor tubes, the pale static from an old television. The places touched by light look clear. The places the light does not reach are left for things that refuse to leave. That may be why certain warnings survive. Most people will go their entire lives without encountering anything strange. But then again, the people in these stories probably thought the same thing. History only leaves us the fragments. The rest lives in the shadows. Thank you for exploring these dark corners with me tonight. If you enjoy where folklore meets history, hit that like button and subscribe to join the circle for our next tale.